It was a crisp morning when she first saw him. Eileen hadn't expected her walk to the market to turn into something so haunting. The streets were crowded, people hurrying to their destinations, but she moved at her own pace, her thoughts consumed by the events of the past week. The weight of her grief never quite left her. It had been 2 years since her son's death, 2 years since her world crumbled. But today, something felt different. She was passing an alley, the smell of old garbage filling the air, when her eyes caught something that made her stop. A child, a filthy, ragged little boy. He stood against the wall, a thin jacket too big for his small frame, barely keeping the chill away. His clothes were torn and dirty, his face hidden behind messy hair. But it wasn't the dirt or the ragged clothes that made Eileen freeze in place. It was his eyes. They were wide, too familiar. Eileen's breath caught in her throat. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest as she took an involuntary step toward him. He looked like him. The boy's face was barely visible, but those eyes, those deep, haunting eyes, they were the same. They mirrored the eyes of her son, the boy she had lost 2 years ago, the boy she had buried. No, it can't be him. Her mind raced as she forced herself to take a step back, but her feet felt like they were glued to the pavement. The image of that child, so similar to the one she'd lost, twisted her insides. It couldn't be. She couldn't let herself believe it. The boy didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there, staring at her with those eyes. Tears welled up in Eileen's eyes, threatening to spill over. She swallowed hard, trying to push the overwhelming emotions back. This had to be some cruel trick of the mind. But how could it not be him? She reached into her purse with trembling hands, her heart beating loudly in her ears. "Hey," she said, her voice shaking. "Are you okay?" The boy's lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Eileen took another step closer, her heart racing. She wanted to ask him 100 questions, but they all got stuck in her throat. How could this boy be so like her son? What were the chances? A voice from behind her broke the silence. "Are you talking to that kid?" Eileen turned sharply, her gaze locking with a passerby who had stopped to watch her. "He looks lost," Eileen mumbled, her voice hoarse. The passerby gave her a strange look, but didn't say anything further. The boy, still silent, continued to stare at Eileen, his expression unreadable. There was something about him, something otherworldly. Eileen's pulse quickened as she suddenly felt a cold chill run through her. She turned away, desperate to push the thought from her mind. This was just a kid, lost and hungry, just like many others she had seen before. Nothing more. But her feet wouldn't let her leave. The boy's eyes followed her every move, never blinking, never looking away. The haunting familiarity of those eyes held her captive. What if it's him? No, she couldn't entertain such a thought. It was impossible. Her son was gone, buried in a grave she couldn't bear to visit anymore. That chapter of her life was closed. And yet, her heart, her very soul, screamed for answers. She couldn't take it anymore. She took another step, desperate to flee, to get away from the boy, to escape the ghosts of her past. But just as she turned to leave, a quiet voice whispered from behind her, "Mom." The word hit Eileen like a punch to the gut. Her heart stopped. She spun around, her eyes wide in disbelief, her breath ragged. The boy was staring at her with those eyes, his lips trembling. "I'm cold," he said softly, almost pleading. "Can I come with you?" For a moment, Eileen didn't know what to do. Her mind couldn't process what was happening, couldn't process the way her heart ached for the boy, this stranger who had just called her mum. But before she could respond, the boy took a small step forward. His hand reached out toward her. Eileen's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move. The world seemed to spin around her as memories flooded back. The sound of her son's laughter, his warm embrace, the way his tiny hand had once fit perfectly in hers. And then, without thinking, she took the boy's hand. The world around her vanished. All that mattered was this child who, in that moment, felt like he was her son. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over as she pulled him closer. She whispered the only word that made sense. "Come with me." A cold wind blew down the alley. But for the first time in years, Eileen felt warmth fill her chest. Eileen barely slept that night. The boy's face, his eyes, haunted her dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, the boy she had just met but felt like she had known for years. His eyes weren't just a reflection of her son's, they were him. Her mind couldn't comprehend what had happened. How could this child be so similar to the son she had buried? The next morning, she woke up in a cold sweat. the sheets tangled around her. The events of the previous day had felt like a blur, but the memory of the boy's eyes was as sharp and clear as if it had just happened. She glanced at the clock. It was already late in the morning. Her husband, James, was getting ready for work, his tie half done, and his face set in the usual morning routine. "Morning," she said softly, trying to sound normal, but James barely looked at her as he walked past. Grabbing his coffee, the heaviness in her chest grew. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She needed to find out who that child really was. There had to be an explanation. After a quick breakfast, Eileen left her house with one goal in mind: to find the boy. She retraced her steps from yesterday, moving through the streets where she'd first seen him. The alley was quiet, deserted except for a few scattered piles of trash. She felt a cold rush of disappointment as she realized there was no sign of the boy. Had it all been a figment of her imagination, or had he vanished like a ghost? "Excuse me," Eileen asked, a woman pushing a stroller nearby. "Did you see a homeless boy around here yesterday? Maybe around my height, ragged clothes, messy hair?" The woman looked at Eileen for a moment before shaking her head. "No, sorry, haven't seen anyone like that." Frustrated, Eileen moved on, asking more people, but no one had seen the child. No one knew who he was. She couldn't give up, not yet. There had to be someone who had seen him. Eileen found herself walking past the small homeless shelter a few blocks away. It was a run-down building, tucked between two taller, more modern structures. The windows were grimy, and the place smelled faintly of mildew. But she hoped someone inside might know something. She hesitated before pushing open the door. The bell above it jingled softly as she entered, and a few heads turned to look at her. The receptionist, an older woman with a weary look, eyed Eileen with suspicion. "Can I help you, miss?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I'm looking for a boy," Eileen said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He was here yesterday, a homeless child, ragged clothes, around 10 or 11. The receptionist frowned, her eyes narrowing. "There's a lot of kids here. Can you be more specific?" I don't know. He looked just like my son." Eileen's voice broke on the last word, and she quickly cleared her throat, embarrassed. "I just need to know if he's here, or if anyone has seen him." The receptionist's eyes softened for a moment. "Listen, there's a boy who comes in every now and then, a little scruffy. Yeah, but he's not always here. He comes in, sleeps, eats, and then disappears again. But he hasn't been here for a while. Maybe 2 weeks. Eileen felt her heart skip a beat. 2 weeks. Yeah, I've seen him. I think his name is Leo. But like I said, he doesn't stay long. You could check with the shelters in the area, maybe. I'm sure he's around somewhere." Eileen nodded and quickly turned to leave. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Leo. The boy's name was Leo. She could barely think straight as the pieces began to come together. As Eileen stepped back outside, the wind picked up, a gust of cool air blowing against her skin. She paused for a moment, her hand clutching her purse tightly, her thoughts racing. If the boy was named Leo, it didn't explain anything, but it gave her a clue, a shred of something real to follow. She immediately pulled out her phone and started typing in the address of the next shelter. Hours later, after visiting several shelters, Eileen was exhausted. She had spoken to countless staff members, all of whom told her the same thing: there was no sign of the boy, Leo, that they knew of. Desperate, she walked to a small cafe near one of the shelters and sat at a corner table. She tried to collect her thoughts. Could she really believe that the boy was connected to her son? Was she imagining things? Was her grief clouding her judgment? She pulled out her phone and stared at the last photo of her son, taken years ago. His wide smile, his laughing eyes, and then the terrible accident that had taken him from her. Her finger traced the edges of the photo, and she looked up, startled when a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, Miss, are you Eileen?" Eileen looked up quickly. Standing before her was a man she didn't recognize, his face partially obscured by a hood. "I know you're looking for the boy," he said in a low voice, glancing round as though making sure no one was listening. "I know who he is." Eileen's heart raced. Could this be it? The moment she finally got an answer, she stood up quickly, her hands trembling. "Who is he?" she asked urgently. The man stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Meet me outside. We need to talk." Eileen's heart pounded in her chest as she followed the man through the cafe's back exit. The cool air hit her face, sending a shiver down her spine. She had been chasing this lead all day, each dead end only making her more desperate to find the truth. And now, there was a stranger, claiming to know something about the boy who looked like her dead son. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely steady. She tried to keep the fear from her tone, but it was hard. The intensity of the moment was starting to overwhelm her. She was so close, but every step forward felt like a trap. The man looked over his shoulder, then pulled his hood back slightly, revealing a face that seemed too familiar for comfort. Eileen couldn't quite place it, but there was something about him that stirred a memory. "I know about the boy, Eileen," he said, his voice low, urgent. "I can help you find him." Eileen frowned, confusion clouding her thoughts. Why would you help me? She had no reason to trust this man, yet something about the way he spoke made her think he wasn't just some random stranger. "What do you know about him?" He took a deep breath, glancing around as though making sure they weren't being watched. "Let's walk. It's safer that way." They walked down the narrow street, the man moving quickly, Eileen struggling to keep pace. The shadows stretched long across the sidewalk as the sun began to dip below the horizon. They turned into an alley, and the man stopped in front of a crumbling building. The faded sign above the door read Zoe's Shelter, a small facility she had passed earlier but hadn't given much thought to. Eileen's pulse quickened. "This doesn't look like a place for answers." "Trust me," the man said, his eyes dark and intense. "It's the only place you'll find them." He pushed open the door, which creaked loudly on its hinges. Inside, the room was dimly lit, and the faint smell of old furniture and mildew hung in the air. A few people sat huddled on worn sofas, looking up at Eileen with indifferent eyes as she stepped inside. The man led her through a back hallway, and as they reached a door at the end, he stopped. "Wait here," he said, then knocked 3 times. A moment later, the door swung open, revealing a woman sitting behind a desk. "Alex, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice a mix of concern and confusion. Alex glanced at Eileen and then back at the woman. "I need to talk to you about something. It's urgent." The woman's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "All right, come in." The door closed behind them, leaving Eileen standing in the dim hallway, her mind racing. What was going on here? Why was she being led into this place? And why did the man Alexium so determined to speak to this woman? She hesitated for a moment, then pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was small, filled with the faint hum of an old fan in the corner. A stack of papers sat on the desk, and a single lamp cast long shadows across the room. Alex and the woman were talking in hushed voices, and Eileen felt like she was intruding on something private. But she couldn't turn back now. She needed to know. "Please," Eileen said, her voice raw with emotion. "What do you know about the boy? The one I saw yesterday, the one who looks like my son?" The woman looked up at her, then at Alex, as if weighing her options. After a long moment of silence, she sighed and leaned back in her chair. "His name is Leo," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "and he's not just a homeless child. He's connected to your past, in ways you don't even realize." Eileen's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What connection does he have to me?" Alex stepped forward, his eyes locked on hers. "The boy you saw, he's not just a random child. He's someone you know. He's someone you lost." Eileen's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? How could he be someone I lost?" The woman sighed again, rubbing her temples. "You need to understand that what you think happened to your son, what you've been told, isn't the whole story. Leo's part of a bigger picture, and the truth is buried deep, but it's all connected." Eileen took a step back, her head spinning. "I don't understand. You're saying Leo is my son? My dead son?" "No," the woman replied quickly, shaking her head. "Not exactly. But Leo, he's a part of the truth. And to understand why he looks like your son, you have to understand what happened to him. What really happened." Alex crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "We can't give you all the answers yet, Eileen, but what we can tell you is that your son's death wasn't an accident. And Leo, he's the key to everything." The words hit Eileen like a punch to the gut. "My son wasn't in an accident," she whispered, the question barely escaping her lips. The woman stood up, her face hardening. "No, he wasn't." Eileen's mind was racing. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the shock of what she was hearing left her paralyzed. Her son wasn't an accident. She couldn't comprehend it. This was the moment when everything she thought she knew about her son's death was being torn apart. "Where is he? Where is Leo?" Eileen demanded, her voice trembling. "He's in hiding," the woman said, "and we need to find him before it's too late." The room felt suffocating as Eileen's mind struggled to process everything she had just heard. The boy, Leohi, was part of a truth she wasn't ready for, a truth that shattered everything she thought she knew about her son's death. But it wasn't just that. Someone had lied to her, and the people who should have protected her and her family had been keeping secrets all this time. Who is responsible for all of this? Eileen demanded, her voice shaking with frustration. She was tired of riddles and half-truths. She needed to know the full story. The woman, whose name Eileen still didn't know, didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at Alex, her face tight with hesitation. Finally, Alex spoke, his voice low and grim. "It's time you knew the truth, Eileen. All of it." The woman turned to Eileen, her expression softening just slightly. "We'll start with your husband." Eileen froze. Her blood ran cold. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you mean, my husband?" Alex stepped forward, his gaze never leaving her. "James is the one who orchestrated your son's death. He's the one who did it." The words hit Eileen like a punch to the stomach. Her breath caught, and for a moment, everything around her went dark. She felt dizzy, as if the ground beneath her was crumbling away. "James, no." The words were weak, barely leaving her mouth. "That's impossible. My husband, he loved our son. He would never—" "I'm sorry, Eileen," the woman said softly, her voice laced with sorrow. "But it's the truth. James was involved in everything. He was the one who planned it. And Leo—" She paused, taking a deep breath. "Leo is part of the fallout. He's connected to it all." Eileen's legs buckled beneath her, and she sank into a chair, her mind swirling. Everything she had known about her life, her family, her world, was a lie. How could James, her husband, the man who had promised to protect her, be responsible for something so monstrous, for the death of their son? "No," she whispered again, shaking her head. "I must be hearing things wrong. There's no way James—" He couldn't. Alex's face was tight with anger. "I'm afraid you've been living in the dark, Eileen, for too long. James wasn't just a loving father. He was a man with secrets, dangerous ones. And your son's death was no accident." Eileen could barely breathe. Her world, which had already been shattered by grief, felt like it was crumbling even more. She thought back to the months before her son's death. James had been distant, cold at times. She had assumed it was work stress or something else. She never once suspected that the man she loved, the man she trusted, could be capable of something so vile. She choked out, "Why would he do this?" The woman sighed heavily. Money, power, control. James was part of a much larger operation, one that you had no idea about. Your son's death was a consequence of his choices. He thought he could protect you from the truth. But now it's all coming to light. Eileen's mind was reeling. She felt as though she were floating outside her own body, hearing everything but unable to process the words. Money, power, control. The reasons were sickening in their simplicity, and yet they made a cruel kind of sense. James had always been ambitious, driven, but this was unimaginable. "So, what happens now?" Eileen asked, her voice a hollow whisper. "We need to find Leo," Alex said urgently. "He knows something. He has information that could bring everything to light. James will stop at nothing to make sure the truth never comes out, and Leo is the key." Eileen's heart lurched. "So, he's in danger. The boy, Leo, he's hiding from James." Alex nodded grimly. "Yes, James will do anything to protect his secrets. He already tried to eliminate Leo once, and now Leo's hiding, trying to stay out of his reach. That's why we need to find him before James does." Eileen felt a surge of anger flood through her. The man who had sworn to protect her, to be her partner, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. And now, his lies were threatening the life of a child who might just hold the key to exposing it all. "I'll find him," Eileen said, determination flooding her voice. "I'll find Leo, and I'll make sure James doesn't hurt him, no matter what it takes." Alex exchanged a glance with the woman, who gave a small nod. "We'll help you, but you need to be careful. James is powerful, and he won't hesitate to do anything to protect his secrets." Eileen stood up, the weight of everything she had learned settling heavily on her shoulders. Her entire life, everything she thought she knew about her family, was a lie. But one thing was clear now: she would stop at nothing to protect Leo and uncover the truth. She couldn't trust her husband anymore, not after everything she had learned. She turned toward the door. "Where do we start? We have a lead," Alex said. "A safe house where Leo might be hiding. Let's go." Eileen nodded, feeling a cold fury build within her. She wasn't just going to let James get away with this. She would fight for the truth, for Leo, and for the memory of her son. The night air was thick with tension as Eileen, Alex, and the woman, whose name was revealed to be Zoe, drove through the darkened streets. The city around them felt like a maze, twisting with secrets and lies. Every streetlight that flashed by seemed to taunt her with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. She kept thinking about Leo. Was he really connected to her son? How was this possible? How could a child, a stranger, look so much like the boy she had lost? And why had James, her husband, the man she had spent years with, done this? She had always trusted him and had loved him with all her heart. But now everything was fractured. "We're almost there," Alex said from the front seat, his voice breaking through Eileen's thoughts. "We'll find Leo. He's our only chance at bringing this all to light." Eileen nodded, the lump in her throat growing larger. "I just want answers. I need to know the truth. About Leo, about James, about everything." Zoe turned round in her seat, her eyes softening. "You will, Eileen. But you have to understand, once the truth comes out, there's no going back. James won't let you walk away from this unscathed." The words hung in the air, heavy with warning. Eileen's hands clenched in her lap. She had already lost so much. What was the worst that could happen now? Minutes later, they arrived at a quiet, run-down part of the city. Eileen barely recognized the area. It was the kind of place he would have driven past without a second thought. But tonight, it was the only place that mattered. The safe house wasn't much, just a small, unmarked building hidden between two larger, more imposing structures. It looked abandoned, the windows boarded up, the door locked. Eileen's heart hammered as she stepped out of the car. "We're here," Zoe said, "but don't expect a warm welcome." Alex knocked on the door 3 times, and after a moment, it creaked open. A man appeared in the doorway, his face shadowed by the dim light. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. "We need to see Leo," Alex replied. "Is he here?" The man hesitated, looking Eileen up and down. After a long pause, he stepped aside, motioning for them to enter. "Come in quickly. We don't have much time." Eileen stepped inside, followed by Zoe and Alex. The room was small and bare, with only a few chairs and a table. In the corner, a young boy sat on the floor, his back to them. He was scruffy, wearing torn clothes, but Eileen could see the resemblance immediately. His hair, his posture, the way he sat with his head slightly down, just like her son had once done. "Leo," Alex said softly. The boy turned slowly, his eyes wide and filled with a sorrow that Eileen couldn't ignore. At that moment, everything around her seemed to fade. The boy's face, though worn and tired, was so much like her son's that Eileen felt a jolt of recognition deep within her. "You're the one," Eileen whispered, her voice trembling. "You look just like him." Leo's eyes flickered with hesitation. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared at her. His gaze was so intense, so filled with an emotion that Eileen couldn't place. It was as if he knew what she was feeling, and for the first time, Eileen realized the depth of the connection between them. "I'm sorry," Leo finally said, his voice small, almost broken. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Eileen took a step forward, her heart aching. "You haven't hurt me, Leo. I just need to know. Why do you look like my son? Why do you have his eyes?" Leo swallowed hard, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. "I'm not your son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I am connected to him, to your son, and to your husband." Eileen's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Her mind raced with fear and confusion. Was Leo involved in her son's death? Had James been hiding the truth from her all along? Leo finally stood up, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "I didn't know who I was until recently, but I found out that I'm the result of a plan that started with your son." And with James, Eileen's pulse quickened. She stepped forward, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What kind of plan?" Leo met her gaze with a mixture of guilt and sadness. "A plan to take what wasn't his. Your son's death wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, and I was part of it." The words felt like a slap to the face. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she stumbled back, bracing herself against the wall. No, that's not possible. My son, he was just a child. James would never." Leo lowered his head, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry, but I'm the reason he's gone. I'm the product of what they did to him." Eileen's mind spiraled, her body trembling with shock. You're telling me that James, my husband, he used you to take my son's place?" Leo nodded, his voice breaking. "Yes, they wanted to cover up what happened, to erase the truth. And I was the result." Eileen couldn't breathe. Her world had crumbled again, even more violently than before. She had trusted James, she had loved him, and now, she realized he had betrayed her in the worst way possible. Tears welled up in Eileen's eyes. She didn't know whether to scream or fall to her knees. She had thought the truth would set her free, but now it felt like a prison. Eileen stood frozen, her mind struggling to catch up with the torrent of information she had just uncovered. The boy in front of her, Leo, was the key to the twisted reality her life had become. Her son's death wasn't an accident. It had been orchestrated by James, the man she loved, the man she had trusted with her life. And now, Leo, who looked so much like the son she had lost before her, the living reminder of the dark, twisted plan that had stolen everything from her. Eileen looked at him, the boy who seemed so lost, so broken. He wasn't just a victim of James's schemes. He was the living proof of everything her husband had done, everything she had lost. "I didn't know," Leo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask for this, but I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. It was part of a plan that I didn't understand at first, but now I see it for what it is." Eileen's chest tightened with grief and anger. "You didn't ask for this," she repeated, her voice cracking. "No one asked for this, Leo. Not you, not me, but here we are. You're here, and everything I thought I knew is a lie. He is the reason my son is gone, and now you're telling me you were the product of his lies." Leo nodded silently, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I never meant for it to happen like this, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to tell you the truth. You deserve to know." Eileen took a deep breath, her mind reeling. She needed to find some way to make sense of this, some way to hold on to her sanity. She had lost so much, but she couldn't let herself lose everything. "Not now. I don't know how to feel about this," Eileen whispered. "I don't know how to live with this." "Neither do I," Leo said, his voice shaking. "But I know one thing. I didn't choose this, and neither did your son. But we both deserve justice. You deserve justice." Eileen looked up at Leo, her emotions swirling like a storm. She had to take action. She couldn't sit back and let James destroy her, let him walk away scot-free after everything he had done. She had been powerless for so long, but not anymore. "Justice," Eileen muttered, her fists clenching at her sides. "Yes, I'll make sure you get justice, Leo, and I'll make sure James pays for what he's done." Leo's eyes widened. "Eileen, you don't have to." "I do," Eileen interrupted, her voice firm now, as if the weight of everything that had happened had finally settled into her bones. "I have nothing left to lose. I'll expose him. I'll make sure everyone knows what he did." The weight of her words hung in the air, but Eileen knew deep down that this was the only way forward. She wasn't just fighting for Leo now. She was fighting for herself, for the truth, for everything she had been robbed of. Eileen turned to Zoe and Alex, who had been silently watching the exchange. "We need to go to the authorities. We need to take everything we know and bring it to light. James has to pay for what he's done, and we can't let him hide behind his wealth and power any longer." Zoe nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "You're right, but we have to be careful. He won't go down easily. He'll do anything to cover his tracks." Eileen knew the danger was real. James was dangerous. He had always been charming, persuasive, able to manipulate anyone in his path. But she wasn't the naive woman she had been 2 years ago. She was stronger now, more focused. She wouldn't let James win. "Not this time. We'll be careful," Eileen said, her voice steady. "But we'll expose him. We'll make sure everyone knows the truth. We won't stop until we do." Alex looked at her with a quiet respect. "You've come a long way, Eileen. You're stronger than you know." Eileen didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. The truth was all she needed now. The truth, and the courage to face it head-on. The next few days were a blur. Eileen and the others worked quickly, gathering everything they could to bring James to justice. It wasn't easy. James had connections, wealth, and the ability to cover his tracks in ways that were hard to fathom. But Eileen had one thing that he didn't: the truth. She went to the police, provided them with the evidence she had, and made sure Leo's story was heard. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. But every time she looked at Leo, the boy who had unknowingly borne the burden of her son's death, she found the strength to keep going. In the end, James's empire began to crumble. His lies were exposed, and the truth of what he had done came to light in ways that no amount of money or power could shield him from. He was arrested, tried for his crimes, and sentenced to prison. The man who had once been the center of her world was now nothing more than a shadow of the past. A man brought low by his own betrayal. Eileen didn't celebrate his downfall. It wasn't about that. The pain of losing her son would never go away. But she could finally breathe, knowing that justice had been served. As the weeks passed, Eileen found herself beginning to heal. It wasn't an easy process. Grief didn't have a neat timeline, and the scars of betrayal ran deep. But with Leo's help, she started to reclaim the parts of herself she had lost. He wasn't a replacement for her son, but in a way, he became a part of her journey toward healing, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was a path forward. Eileen sat on the porch one evening, staring out at the setting sun. Leo sat beside her, no longer the frightened, lost child he had once been. He was beginning to rebuild his life, too. The road ahead would be difficult for both of them, but it was theirs to walk. Eileen took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she had been through. Losing her son, finding out the truth, confronting the man she had loved, it had all led her here, to this moment of quiet peace. Sometimes, losing everything, Eileen whispered, is the only way to find who you really are. She looked at Leo, and for the first time in a long while, a small smile tugged at her lips. She had fought for the truth, and in the end, it had set her free. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The end.